His name was Jake, and I first met him on Tinder. I wouldn't say it was love at first sight. It took quite a bit of convincing from him to get me to agree to a date. Honestly, he wasn't really my type, kind of looked like he adored himself, tall and muscular. Usually, I'm into guys who are a bit rounder, you know. That probably doesn't matter to you, but just trust me, women who prefer normal guys are out there. Jake somehow won me over with his sharp wit, smooth words, and his total geekiness. I've always been a big Marvel fan, or at least I was back then, and I always tried to catch all the movies on opening weekend whenever I could. Plus, I was pretty into horror movies, especially the Conjuring universe. So Jake eventually convinced me to go see The Nun with him. Honestly, movies make a pretty good first date setting. If things are going south, you can just subtly shift your seat and ignore each other for the entire film. He picked me up from a Starbucks nearby. Give strangers from Tinder your address, by the way, and we drove over to the theater. I've got to say, he was surprisingly charming, funny, personable, and just generally a good time. The guy knew his movies, took kind of a cute nerd vibe, which in my book is pretty attractive. The only issue was that Jake was pretty pessimistic about The Nun's quality. I'll admit, he was right, the movie totally sucked and the sequel was even worse. But that's not what this story's about. Jake was convinced that the first film was going to be terrible, even though we were going to see it on opening night, and he kept promising me that he had something in mind to make the whole experience more memorable. So I was thinking he'd probably snag some seats toward the back, expecting a night of dodging unwanted kisses and up and down groping. But I didn't let that ruin my mood. We grabbed our tickets, bought some popcorn and a hot dog. Jake didn't want to drink anything, though arguing that needing to leave for the bathroom would ruin the experience. I could see his point. I did miss a crucial scene in The Dark Knight once because I needed a bathroom break. It was kind of intense, yet a little overbearing, especially with salty popcorn in hand. Sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row, and we arrived early, which meant we could pick our seats on this small-town theater where seating was first come, first served. He led us down the aisle until we were roughly in the middle of that row, looking down directly at the screen, honestly, a pretty perfect spot. I was okay with the arrangement. We sat there making small talk, giggling at the ads, and quietly watching the trailers like good moviegoers should. When the lights dimmed, Jake finished his hot dog and handed me the popcorn so we could share it. Our hands brushed a couple of times as we grabbed salted pieces, and honestly, I felt a slight spark between us. The movie started, and I was kind of into it. I was enjoying it. I'm pretty easy to win over when it comes to movies, and Tessa Farraga could convince me of pretty much anything if she was in it. But Jake wasn't impressed at all. He kept nudging me, whispering things about how cheesy it was and how it could use some extra scares. I mostly tuned him out because I was genuinely into the film. I wasn't about to pretend I wasn't. Then, out of nowhere, he told me to look down, and at the same time, I felt something poking into my side. Jake was sitting on my left, and there was an elderly couple on the far end of the row, leaving us with the entire row to ourselves. I looked down and saw that Jake was holding the biggest hunting knife I'd ever seen, the tip pressed just a little into my side. I remember every word he said clearly. "Move or scream, call for help, try anything again, the blade goes in," he whispered. "Just keep watching the movie." And so we sat there doing just that. All the while, Jake kept making goofy remarks, joking about the film as if he didn't have a huge knife pressed against me. I was trembling in fear, completely frozen, almost about to cry in terror. I had to suppress sobs as I responded to his ridiculous comments about the movie. I honestly had no idea if he'd snap and hurt me if I disagreed, or if I told him I thought the film was terrible. It was pretty obvious he hated it, and somehow it only got worse as the movie went on. But I didn't care anymore. I was just begging for it to end. All these scenarios were running through my mind. What would happen when the credits started rolling? Would we just walk out like everything was normal? Or would he decide to turn the blade on me? I finally understood why he forbade us from buying drinks if I'd get up. I might have been tempted to pee myself from all the fear. Sitting there for 90 minutes, with a blade gently pressed into my stomach, was pure hell. I desperately wanted to do something, to scream or run, but it felt like he'd gut me faster than I could call for help, and that made me freeze even more. When the movie finally wrapped up, we sat still for a moment as the credits rolled, me trembling, the knife still pressed against my side. The theater lights came up, and that's when I saw it. It was a prop knife, not real. I wasn't some idiot for thinking Sothise was a professional-level movie prop. I swear, I recognized the branding. Rob Zombie's Halloween. He must have paid top dollar for it, because in the light I could see the official stamp on the handle. That explained how he kept it steady enough to feel like it could really pierce me, but never did. Jake grinned at me as if he'd just given me some incredible gift. There, didn't I make a terrible movie way scarier? He said when he saw the look of pure rage and panic on my face. Honestly, he looked genuinely surprised. This idiot actually believed that because I loved horror movies, I'd be thrilled with him pretending to threaten me for an hour. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was so obscene I can't say it here. I did throw most of my popcorn right in his face, though it was mostly untouched because I was too scared to move. I stormed out of that theater, told the manager who was a friend, and he ended up calling the cops. There was barely a charge of something about causing undue stress, but because the lighting was dim and it was a fake knife, the law was pretty lenient. I pressed charges anyway, but Jake got off with a slap on the wrist. Thankfully, a sympathetic judge issued a restraining order, so I figured I wouldn't hear from him again. To Jake, I was just some hysterical woman who couldn't handle her horror movies. All I knew was, he thought I'd be happy to sit through that absolute nightmare, and for that, I hope some possessed doll chokes him in his sleep. A little while later, I went to see The Silence of the Lambs. I didn't know much about it. I hadn't read the book, just that my friend said it was intense and we had to go. He bylaid on me an hour before, so I decided to go alone. The theater was packed with only a few empty seats, and as I made my way down the aisle to my spot, I heard some murmurs from the crowd. I squeezed past them and finally sat down next to a guy dressed in a heavy coat, even though it was spring, and the theater was warm. I apologized for bumping him and thought I heard a grunt or a belch. Honestly, the guy's body odor was pretty strong. I took a big whiff of my popcorn, hoping it would help, and just ignored him as the movie started. Silence of the Lambs is a tense film, and it only gets more intense. I kept feeling my neighbor's shoulder nudge against mine, so I gently pushed him away, probably just paranoia. I couldn't hear him snoring, but I was sure I felt the vibrations. As it grew scarier, I instinctively nudged him again, just to create space. I finished my popcorn, my soda, and I managed to sit through the whole thing without needing to get up, which was a relief. Can you imagine the trouble if I'd had to leave in a crowded theater? When the credits rolled, I stayed put, watching as the lights dimmed. I waited for the path to clear so I could leave. That's when I realized the guy next to me was still there. I thought he might be asleep, and I didn't want to just leave him behind, so I nudged his shoulder gently, saying, "Hey, you good?" That's when I saw Ithai's head slumped over to the side, his hat falling away, and I knew was dead. Not just recently dead, mind you. It was obvious I'd been sitting next to an unresponsive body the entire film. So how could he have made any noise? Why did I feel him moving? The police explained later that when I nudged him, it probably released trapped gas. And during the process of decomposition, his body bloated and shifted, causing the vibrations I'd felt. They said the cause of death was something non-suspicious, just natural causes, I suppose. Still, it bugged me that he might have been dead for hours and no one noticed. Apparently, he'd come to the theater alone, possibly taking an overdose and falling asleep forever. I don't know what he took, but lethal overdoses are usually violent and ugly. It's strange that nobody found him after the last show, that he'd been sitting there for who knows how many hours. The theater, I think, didn't even bother checking the screens between shows. What irks me, though, is why he chose The Silence of the Lambs as his final movie. It's not exactly a peaceful film to fade away to. Maybe it was just the last show that day that wasn't packed, or maybe Nostr was something in the film he related to or haunted by. I guess he just wanted to silence his own lambs. This was all back in 1997. I remember going to see Scream with my girlfriend, Jennifer, the day after New Year's. That was a few weeks after the movie had been out. It wasn't very busy, perfect for a date. Jennifer was always pretty handsy during horror movies, which I didn't mind, so I'd find any excuse to get close. We weren't the only ones holding onto each other that night, but little did we know what was ahead. We had popcorn, sodas, tickets, and a few trailers, just like usual. When Drew Barrymore's infamous scene started, things got tense. I was making out with Jennifer and not paying much attention to anything else. But a guy a few rows ahead of us didn't like what Randy said about horror movie rules so much so that he yelled back at the screen. Now, in the 90s, that was considered pretty rude. People kept quiet during movies unless it was a laugh or a gasp. This guy, let's call him Mike, started yelling about the integrity of horror films, and suddenly, he was yelling at the movie itself. The guy sitting next to Mike, who I'll call Steve, started shouting back at him, saying, "Dude, it's just a movie. Sit down and shut up." Steve wasn't tall or buff, more like 5'6", thin, with long hair and a plain t-shirt. But he squared up to Mike like he was ready to fight. Seriously, he poked Mike in the chest and told him to shut up so everyone could enjoy the film. I grabbed some popcorn, and Jennifer whispered to me, joking about betting what would happen next. I figured Mike was going to back down, but I was dead wrong. Instead, the guy let out a strained roar, and mid-growl, his voice cracked. Then he reached out and snapped Steve's finger backward with a loud crack. Steve stumbled back, staring at his mangled finger, and I saw a look on his face that still makes me shiver, the look of a man who just realized he made a terrible mistake. Steve had the confidence of someone who thought he could handle anything, but that moment shattered it. Turns out Mike, the one who just snapped his finger, was a big guy, maybe nearly 300 pounds, and he charged straight at Steve in the aisle. One punch and Steve was on the floor. Then Mike was pounding him like a man possessed, his fists flying, blood splattering from Steve's mouth. He kept screaming about the movie, horror, disrespect, just shouting incoherent rage. I wasn't just going to stand there. Jennifer begged me not to jump in, but I started moving down the aisle. Thankfully, out of nowhere, a woman, let's call her Lisa, rushed in. She leaped over the chairs, clearly some kind of off-duty cop. She threw Mitchell off Steve, and he rolled down the aisle. She then pulled a pepper spray from her purse, let Mitchell have it, and cuffed him. These were plastic ties she always carried, just in case. Mitchell got face full of mace, a few broken ribs, and was bundled up in the end. Steve was okay, just some broken teeth. As for Mitchell, the authorities said it was a mugging, but honestly, it felt like a punishment. No one quite knew if he was truly a threat or just a lunatic, but he paid for it. No more movie for him. Later, the theater gave out refunds and free tickets, though I doubt they did for Mitchell. I got a bit of street cred for trying to step in, at least in Jennifer's eyes. I never told anyone about that night, but I had nightmares for weeks except in those. Mitchell wasn't just some creep. She was a demon, crawling through the aisles, devouring the seats. I think I even saw her again a few years later, on a date, with some shady guy who didn't seem right at all. They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but something about him gave me bad vibes. I wonder if she was some runaway or if she'd been sent back home. All I know is, working as a theater cleaner at night can be downright terrifying. People's garbage and messes are gross, but what really creeped me out was one particular night after a midnight Hereditary. I was cleaning late, around 2 a.m., and I noticed movement in the cinemath, kind of skittering across the aisle that made my blood run cold. I called out, hoping it was just my imagination, but then I heard the unmistakable sound of something crunching underfoot near the aisle. Heart pounding, I started creeping toward the exit, when suddenly I saw a slender figure, dragging itself across the floor like a prisoner crawling. I shouted out, asking if they were okay, but no answer, just more noises, more rustling. Before I could get away, Shethai's young girl, dirty blonde hair, smeared with ketchup and mustard, leaped toward me, knocking me against the seat. She wasn't trying to hurt me, I think just desperate to escape. She threw me back hard enough to crack my spine, no joke, and started yelling in a language I didn't recognize. My instinct was to run, but I just grabbed her head and shoved it toward the popcorn on the floor, telling her to eat it. She jumped on the popcorn, shoveling it into her face like she'd been starving. Honestly, I didn't want the cops involved or her getting caught. Thighs was probably a runaway trying to survive. I did the only thing I could think of, gently poked her with my trash grabber and told her she had to go. She shook her head but kept eating. I gestured toward the exit, hoping she'd understand enough English, and she finally scooped the last of the popcorn and ran out. Looking back now, I realized the danger I walked in. Maybe a sick part of me hoped she was just desperate, not something darker. For weeks, I'd have nightmare-esque wasn't some random girl. She was a demon, slipping between the seats, devouring everything in her path. I swear I saw her again this time on a date, with some sketchy guy who looked like trouble. I wonder if she met him on the street, or if he was some agent sent to find her. All I know is, working as a late-night theater cleaner isn't just dirty sometimes, it's downright terrifying. And yeah, I've seen TikToks and YouTube shorts about how gross people leave theaters. Now I just laugh. If that's the worst thing you've got in your theaters, consider yourself lucky, because sometimes the real monsters are hiding in the aisles.